It's 5 p.m. here in Lagos, Nigeria, and the last edition of The World Today for this week. I'm Joke Rogers. Here's what's coming up. Britain's King Charles opens Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Samoa, acknowledging painful aspects of the past. Thousands evacuated in India. Cyclone Dona makes landfall in the eastern parts of the country. The World Today begins right now. Welcome again, everyone. Britain's King Charles III has officially opened the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Samoa. Addressing world leaders, the British monarch says no one can change the past, but nations can commit to finding creative ways to right inequalities that endure. The King is the symbolic head of the Commonwealth, which is a grouping of 56 countries. Most of them are former territories of Britain's empire. The CHOGM is set to feature talks on climate change and the question of reparations for Britain's role in transatlantic slavery.
The Commonwealth mattered a great deal to my dear mother, the late Queen. Her commitment to you all, as that of my grandfather, King George VI, before her, is one which has helped to shape my own life for as long as I can remember. Since my first visit to Malta, aged just 5 in 1954, I have traveled to almost every corner of the Commonwealth. I have met remarkable people in every conceivable walk of life and learned a great deal from so many proud cultures and traditions. At a time of heightened global tensions, of horrifying conflict and challenges of the greatest magnitude, it seems to me that these connections between us are more precious than ever. Together we are wiser, stronger, and more able to respond to the demands of our time. I understand from listening to people across the Commonwealth how the most painful aspects of our past continue to resonate. It is vital, therefore, that we understand our history to guide us to make the right choices in the future. Where inequalities exist, for example, in access to opportunity, to education, to skills training, to employment, to health, and to a planet in whose climate our human race can both survive and thrive, we must find the right ways and the right language to address them.
Meanwhile, as calls grow for justice for the transatlantic slave trade, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer says the action was abhorrent. He says while history cannot be changed, it should be talked about. He made these comments on the sidelines of a Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Samoa.
The slave trade, slave practice was abhorrent. And it's very important that we start from that place. And of course, that matters hugely to many of the countries that are represented here. The question then is, where do we go from there? Now, my posture, if you like, is that we should be forward-looking, that we should look at what are today's challenges in this group of countries represented here today. And in the discussions I've already had before I came here and since I've been here, it's very clear to me that the major challenges are resilience in the face of climate challenges, and also the question of how we improve trade between our countries. And that's my posture, if you like, my focus is on the forward look, not the sort of backward look. But I think our generation can say the slave trade and practice was abhorrent, and we should. You know, we talk about our history, can't change our history. You know, we recognise that, and of course apologies have already been made in relation to the slave trade, and that's not surprising, it's what you would expect. But if you then go on to the question, you know, we're 55 countries here represented, and say in the conversations I've already had, what are the things that have come up most? I can tell you their resilience, their real concern, particularly with some of the smaller countries, about the impact of climate on them and how we can help with international institutions, financial institutions, to unlock money that might help them in relation to facing up to that challenge. That isn't our money, it's unlocking international money. But also this question of trade. There's a huge trade potential here. Almost every country here wants more trade. There's already a huge advantage for Commonwealth countries. I want to drive that further.
Joining us now is political analyst and partner Gainful Solutions, Stephen Hayes. He's also the President Emeritus, Corporate Council on Africa. Stephen joins us from Washington, D.C. Great to have you on the show.
Well, thank you. Good to be here again, and good to see you.
So what are your overall impressions of CHOGM's effectiveness, even as calls grow for justice for the transatlantic slave trade?
Well, I think there's always a certain question about international organizations and their effectiveness because they really don't have a lot of legal binding effect. The Commonwealth Council is, and I've worked during my time at the Corporate Council in Africa with the Commonwealth Business Council. I found them very effective in terms of trade. And in terms of representing the different interests of the trade countries, but I think that's been one of the more effective parts of the Commonwealth Council. The British, of course, have benefited largely from that, as because it's kept them in the center of activity. It's kept them as, I think, as a world power. But a lot of changes are coming. If Australia goes to become a republic, does it stay with the Commonwealth Council? Does it, or does that really mark the beginning of the end of this? I don't know.
And many wonder how these meetings impact and facilitate cooperation on global issues such as climate change, human rights and security, which was, much of what the King spoke about in his opening speech.
Well, I think that is one of the real benefits of the council. It does allow leaders to come together. It does allow them to exchange points of view, which is important. And also, I think in terms of individual countries, the fact that they have peers there can also put pressure on the center, which in this case, of course, is the United Kingdom. So I think that it's an effective means in the sense of conversation, in terms of new ideas, in terms of laying the groundwork for formal agreements in the future, and particularly on climate change, particularly on trade, especially. And I suppose the reparations issue is another one, but I don't think that's going to be a major push for a number of reasons.
Right, and Stephen, as many talks have been ongoing, including from the King and of course the Keir Starmer, the PM, saying that there are regrets about the past, about the transatlantic slave trade. Going forward, what emerging trends or issues do you foresee shaping future agendas at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting?
I think the nature of the Commonwealth is going to be an issue in the future and won't be at this issue, at this session. It's the 75th anniversary, so it's celebratory right now. But I think that in the future, it's going to be the nature of the Commonwealth. What is it? There's going to be a lot of changes coming. But I think the issues are going to be very heavily on climate change because several countries are being threatened by completely being destroyed because of oceans rising. So that's going to be one issue. It's going to be the climate effect on Africa. It's going to be fairly severe. It would appear from readings, and so that's going to be a major issue. And I think always the economic trade is going to be an issue. Politics. I think historically the various countries of the Commonwealth had a lot more in common than simply language, but the politics and global politics and populism now, I think, is changing the nature of the directions of countries. And so I think it's going to be harder to have unity, but I think that on issues such as trade and climate change, those may continue to bind the countries and be useful.
And help us understand, really, the relationship between CHOGM and other global governance institutions like the United Nations or the G20. And how does the meeting influence regional organizations such as the African Union?
Well, I think nearly all those other organizations that you mentioned would take precedence, frankly. Certainly the African nations have a stronger tie to the African Union and will have in the future than they will historically the Crown of England. So I think that it will continue to play a role in terms of coalescing different groups and overlap, but I think it's going to have a lesser role in the future than, say, the African Union. Certainly the United Nations. I think BRICS is going to play a strong economic role for whatever directions they go. So I think it's going to continue in the near future to be as a good sounding board for issues, a good meeting ground. But beyond that, I'm not so sure. I will say that one of the useful parts of the Commonwealth has been groups like the Commonwealth Business Council, which are part of the Commonwealth structure. I think Commonwealth Youth Meeting, which happened before this, earlier this week, is important for the future as well. So they provide a means to bring people together that otherwise would not be meeting, and it gives us all a strong international footing.
And finally, Stephen, the leadership of the Commonwealth changed following the death of the Queen Elizabeth, and after the coronation of King Charles. Do you reckon that both will have different views on how to steer the ship of the Commonwealth?
Well, yes, they will have. Britain is looking out, not naturally enough, for its own interest. It would like to say the right things, be the politically correct in terms of overview of the Commonwealth, but it knows it's no longer the same England as it was when the Commonwealth began. The countries such as Samoa and others are going to have a very different view, and theirs are going to be in basic survival right now, given climate change. So there's going to be a greater sense of urgency from countries, several countries, particularly in the view of what's happening in the world today, including climate change, including the populist revolutions that are going on everywhere, including the United States. So I think it's going to be harder to keep the Commonwealth together. I think they're all going to have various points, and what the binding point was: how do we solve climate change? How do we increase the economy? And how do you protect the peoples of individual nations?
Right, Stephen, thank you for your time today.
No, thank you. It's a pleasure as always. Thank you.
Let's move on, touching down on the U.S. elections now, where thousands gathered in the battleground state of Georgia to attend a campaign rally of Vice President Kamala Harris. According to her campaign team, about 20,000 people attended the event, her largest political rally yet. In attendance were musician Bruce Springsteen, former U.S. President Barack Obama, actor Samuel L. Jackson, businessman Tyler Perry, among others. Meanwhile, American singer and songwriter Beyonce is expected to appear alongside the vice president at a rally in Houston later today. The appearance, in which Beyonce will appear with the U.S. singer and guitarist Willie Nelson, is designed to be one of the biggest closing acts of the campaign.
What I cannot understand is why anybody would think that Donald Trump will shake things up in a way that is good for you, because there is absolutely no evidence that this man thinks about anybody but himself. He acts so crazy, and it's become so common that people no longer take it seriously. I'm here to explain to you, just because he acts goofy does not mean his presidency wouldn't be dangerous. This is a leader who has spent her life fighting on behalf of people who need a voice, who need a champion. Kamala wasn't born into privilege. She was raised in a middle-class family. She worked at McDonald's when she was in college to pay her expenses. She didn't pretend to work at McDonald's when it was closed.
It was 17 years ago. It was over 17 years ago when I took a trip to Springfield, Illinois. It was a cold February day. And I went there to support this brilliant young senator who was running for president of the United States. And millions of Americans were energized and inspired, not only by Barack Obama's message, but by how he leads, seeking to unite rather than separate us. Just 12 days left in one of the most consequential elections of our lifetime. And I don't need to tell you, voting has already started. And everybody here knows it's going to be a tight race until the very end. So we have a lot of work ahead of us. But we like hard work. Hard work is good work. Hard work is joyful work. And make no mistake, we will win. We will win. We will win.
I want a president who reveres the Constitution, who does not threaten but wants to protect and guide our great democracy, who believes in the rule of law and the peaceful transfer of power, who will fight for a woman's right to choose, and who wants to create a middle-class economy that will serve all our citizens. There is only one candidate in this election who holds those principles dear, Kamala Harris.
And what I realize is that in this Donald Trump America, there is no dream that looks like me. We want a president who believes that this American dream is for everyone. And that president is Kamala Harris.
On the other side, Republican presidential candidate, former President Donald Trump, took his own campaign rally to Arizona. Mr. Trump called on the people to help him defeat Kamala Harris and make America great again. He also took a dig at the Biden-Harris combination, saying it was the worst in the history of the United States.
With your help, 12 days from now, we're going to win Arizona. We're going to defeat Kamala Harris. And we're going to make America great again. That's what we're going to do. Over the past 4 years, Kamala Harris has orchestrated the most egregious betrayal that any leader in American history has ever inflicted upon our people. She has eradicated our sovereign border, and she has unleashed an army of migrant gangs who are waging a campaign of violence and terror against our citizens. And my message today is very simple. Kamala's migrant invasion, given to us through gross incompetence, disqualifies her from even thinking about being president. We can't let that happen. No person who is responsible for so much bloodshed and death on our soil can ever be allowed to become the president of the United States. What she's done and he's done. Crooked Joe and Kamala, what a combination. Worst combination in the history of our country. And they've weaponized your government. They're a disgrace to our country. Right? And we're a dumping ground. We're like a garbage can for the world. That's what's happened. That's what's happened to our... We're like a garbage can. You know, it's the first time I've ever said that. And every time I come up and talk about what they've done to our country, I get angrier and angrier. First time I've ever said garbage can, but you know what? It's a very accurate description. I watched last night, she did a town hall. Honestly, it was pathetic. Whether you like him or not, I'm not a fan of his. Did you see last night? He blew it. He said, lock him up. He said lock him up last night. He's not allowed to say that. He's such a stupid guy.
Welcome back to The World Today. We're staying with the upcoming presidential elections in the United States. Election workers have begun tabulating early and mail-in ballots at a center in Phoenix, Arizona. Inside the center, dozens of workers are seated in one room where ballots had been returned in green envelopes. The workers are assigned to verify signatures, after which they separate ballots from the envelopes to ensure it remains secret. In another room, the ballots are tabulated with the use of machines. All of these activities are being streamed online by the county to ensure transparency.
We are at the Maricopa County Tabulation and Election Center, and today we are tabulating ballots for the 2024 general election. These are ballots that we received early from voters who had a ballot mailed to their home. So they had the ability to vote their ballot from their kitchen table or the comfort of their home, and then return those ballots to us. These are also ballots for individuals who came to one of our early vote centers, and they were able to go and have their ballot provided to them at a vote center, and then they voted in a voting booth, and those ballots are returned back to the center and processed and tabulated. In Arizona, we do have robust early voting, and so people can sign up to have a ballot mailed to their home. When they return that ballot, it is in a green envelope. They sign on that ballot so that they are verifying that they are who they say they are. That signature is then verified against previous signatures that we have on file. Once we can confirm that that signature is a valid signature, then it goes on to processing. And in ballot processing, we have a Republican and a Democrat, or a Republican and an independent sitting across from each other, and they're separating those ballots from the green envelope. Prior to 2020, the building was pretty accessible by the public. We did have protesters who came up and approached the building in the days following the election. We've also had a lot of threats over the last couple of years, and so we are preparing, we have been preparing to ensure that the building is safe, that the people in it are safe. We hope and we believe that this upcoming election will be one that is peaceful, and that people will go to the voting booths to provide their opinion on the politics of the day. Law enforcement takes threats to election workers and to our election system very seriously in Maricopa County. And so we want individuals to know that. And the majority of the people out in the community are peaceful. They may have strong opinions, but we don't want things that people see or hear on social media to potentially instigate somebody, a lone actor, or a group of people who might want to come and, commit acts of violence. It's unacceptable in our society that would occur.
Let's get more from our correspondent, Maria Bird, who joins us from Washington, D.C. Maria, great to see you today.
Good evening.
Right. So we see U.S. celebrities and musicians swaying in support for Kamala Harris. What's the body language of Republicans? As we know, Beyonce would be appearing in Houston with the vice president later today.
Yeah, so this is going to be, you can see there's been many stars and many actors and actresses and musicians and those who are part of the Hollywood scene that are supporting it coming out here in recent days, the vice president. And so it's clear that she is definitely leaning back on her California roots. The capital in the U.S. for media and Hollywood and those who are in the music and entertainment industries. And so Beyonce being there, and that's going to be a very pivotal sign. We know that Texas has for quite some time had a very strong hold in the Republican Party. And so this is going to be historic and definitely one that will push the tide, and she's really trying to push forward in those communities where there is a strong Republican base. But we also know that there are a number of Republicans that are Republicans for Kamala, and so those are the individuals she's hoping to continue to speak to, and those who could be apathetic about the voting process and have not yet decided they will go out to vote. As you all know, we're in the early voting cycle in many states across the country.
The Georgia rally for Vice President Kamala Harris was set to be her biggest rally yet, where where she had the biggest numbers of people attending. What does that say about her chances? As we know, we only have about 12 days left before votes are cast.
Yes, those rallies were one that were really trying to push the envelope there. We know that there is possibility for that to be a Democratic, potentially one state. We know that there's a lot of efforts and grassroots efforts and galvanizing to push that forward. Her administration and her campaign is really trying to ensure that they're able to capture those votes in Georgia. And this is basically saying that it's going to be required that she turn some states blue in order to clinch the election. So there's all hands on deck from her campaign team, and obviously all of those supporters in the state of Georgia that are obviously part of those influencer communities and do have influence on those voters.
And what's the update on the vote counting in Arizona? We saw early votings where the ballots were mailed to their homes, and as the organizers, the people in charge, explained later on, sorting is ongoing, but things will remain secret until everything is in. But what's the update?
Yes, that's exactly correct. Early voting does allow for them to begin tabulating those votes early, but due to the fact that typically you don't really see the majority of the votes coming in until actually election day, and obviously it takes time to process many of those early voting, they're not going to make any projections during this period of time. Due to the fact also we know that there has been some contentious previous election cycles, and so to ensure the civility and safety of all voters and obviously those who are running for office, this will continue to be kept a very closed, tight-knit until we get to actual election day.
And what do we expect in the coming days? What have you heard, the mood of Americans? Another election year. I know, it's a lot of anxiety. People are wondering, how the day is going to go. Some people swing, to the opposition in the last minute. A lot of people remain on the fence. What's the mood, across the country, or, the places where you've heard?
I think you have definitely explained what many Americans are feeling. And actually, in some cases, we've seen across the world anxiety, anxiousness. As the vice president believes that democracy is on the ballot, I think that many Americans also, whether or not whoever they're supporting, whether it is the current vice president or the former president, they do believe that democracy is on the ballot. America being one of those birthplaces and early adopters of the democratic process, I think that Americans are just concerned that we are able to continue with a clear, civil, respectful process as we go through this next election cycle. So that is really where the anxiety comes from. I think obviously people, whoever their candidate is, they want their candidate to win. But most importantly, I believe that people are hopeful because of what we saw in previous election cycles after the election was over. I think people are just still a bit nervous and anxious to ensure that the civility and that the respect of the process and the respect of democracy is upheld in the United States.
Maria, thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
Away from the U.S. elections, the Menendez brothers, Eric and Lyle, are a step closer to being released on parole. It comes as Los Angeles District Attorney George Gascon recommended the court to resentence the brothers after they had spent 34 years in prison for the shotgun murder of their parents after new evidence emerged indicating they were sexually abused by their father for years. Mr. Gascon said that he would recommend that their life sentences be removed and replaced with a sentence of 50 years to life, but that they would be eligible for parole because of their young age at the time of the murders.
I have to tell you that after a very careful review of all the arguments that were made for people on both sides of this equation, I came to a place where I believe that under the law, resentencing is appropriate, and I am going to recommend that to a court tomorrow. What that means in this particular case is that we're going to recommend to the court that the life without the possibility of parole be removed and that they will be sentenced for murder, which, because there are 2 murders involved, that will be 50 years to life. However, because of their age, under the law, since they were under 26 years of age at the time that these crimes occurred, they will be eligible for parole immediately. However, when you look at the case of the Menendez brothers, you see 2 very young people. One was 19 and the other one was 21 when they committed these horrible acts. And I want to underline, they were horrible acts. There is no excuse for murder. And I will never imply that what we're doing here is to excuse that behavior. Because even if you get abused, the right path is to call the police, seek help. They have been in prison for nearly 35 years. I believe that they have paid their debt to society. And the system provides a vehicle for their case to be reviewed by a parole board. And if the parole concurs with my assessment, and it will be their decision, they will be released accordingly. I must underline, however, this case will be filed in court tomorrow. The final decision will be made by the judge. Court has to agree with my conclusion that they deserve to be resentenced. It is very possible that there may be members of this office that will be present in court opposing the resentencing. And they have a right to do so. And we encourage those that disagree with us to speak, and the court is the appropriate place to do it.
Away from those conflicts, 5 police officers have been injured in a twin bomb attack in central Mexico. According to officials, a car bomb detonation occurred in the town of Acambaro in front of an armed forces office, injuring 3 police officers in an uncommon type of attack in one of the country's most violent states. Simultaneously, a second attack was reported against a police patrol in Yeracuaro, located 30 kilometers from Acambaro, causing its detonation and injuring 2 officers. Authorities of both municipalities implemented a strong security operation with the support of state and federal forces to find those responsible for these attacks. And 13 people have been injured following a bus crash in Malaysia. According to local officials, a tour bus rammed into the back of a trailer on a highway near the northwestern Malaysian town of Taiping. Among the 13 injured were 11 Japanese tourists, a tour guide, and the bus driver. Fire and rescue departments were at the scene of the incident, and all 13 rescued and taken to hospital. And a quick check on the weather. Tropical cyclone Dona has made landfall in eastern India, state of Odisha, bringing wind speeds of 100 to 110 kilometers per hour. According to officials, thousands of people were evacuated to temporary shelters ahead of the storm. The heavy storm uprooted trees, snapped power lines, and inundated some areas. However, no deaths or injuries have been reported. Schools have been closed and flights suspended in and out of the capital.
The landfall process has commenced and the forward sector of the wall cloud region is entering into the land, and the landfall process will continue till today, 25th October morning.
More than 6 lakhs people have been evacuated and taken to cyclone shelters where cooked meal is being provided and other arrangements have been made. and large number of our ODRAF teams, relief teams, teams with equipment to ensure that roads are open, electricity is restored, telecommunication is restored for tomorrow have all also been activated.
To another tropical cyclone, this time in the Philippines, where storm Trami has made landfall in the province of Laguna, bringing strong winds and torrential rainfall. The heavy storm has left at least 26 people killed and forced more than 150,000 to flee their homes. The government ordered businesses and schools in the path of the storm to close in anticipation of heavy rain and flooding. The Philippines typically records an average of 20 tropical storms annually, often resulting in heavy rain, strong winds, and deadly landslides. Welcome back. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has addressed the 18th Asia-Pacific Conference in New Delhi. In the latest move to diversify trade and economic partners, India and the EU agreed in 2022 to relaunch talks on a free trade agreement, initially aiming to complete talks by the end of 2023, but have failed to make significant progress on a deal, with India blaming irrational standards set by the EU as one of the reasons.
We are meeting in the world's biggest democracy, the fastest growing major economy in the world, with the most rapidly expanding renewable energy sector of any major economy. A country at the heart of the world's most dynamic region, the Asia Pacific. And of course, we want a free trade agreement between the EU and India. My government is pushing for swift progress and rapid conclusions, and I'm sure that if we work together on this, Prime Minister, this could happen in months rather than years. Even today, Indians are the largest group of foreign students at our universities. Last year alone, the number of Indians working in Germany grew by 23,000. Their talent is a welcome addition to our labor market.
And joining us now is DW correspondent W Imran in Berlin. W, great to see you. Let's talk about how India fits into the equation of Germany decoupling with China.
Thanks for having me. India has become a huge global player, from manufacturing to services, and India is an important trade ally for many countries. Here in Germany, analysts and journalists have already started asking if India will be the next China for German businesses. So Chancellor Olaf Scholz and a few top ministers and business leaders are in India to talk about strengthening ties and addressing the skilled labor shortage. Both Germany and India have been stable partners, but 2023 was an exceptionally good year where trade between the two countries was more than 30 billion euros. Yet there exists no free trade agreement between India and the EU. This is also in the works. In a way, this visit is meant to also bolster business confidence in Germany, because the latest surveys show that the mood is quite pessimistic here. The EU and Germany were already attempting to decouple and distance themselves from China economically, something that has resulted in a war of tariffs in the last few months.
And touching down on the skilled labor shortage, how is Germany looking to attract more workers?
Well, Germany's skilled worker shortage is something the government has been talking about for months on end. According to a very big research institute here, IFO, at least 33% of the companies questioned still have fewer qualified workers. This is better from the figures last year, but there are concerns that the economy is sluggish and not growing at the speed and rate at which many would have wanted. The labor issue is widespread. Service providers are hit the hardest, and those companies looking looking to hire skilled workers temporarily face a big shortage. This extends to manufacturing and the automotive industry as well. So I think the German government is courting India and Indian workers, as they have previously tried to woo and welcome Kenyan and Nigerian skilled workers as well.
How is the German economy faring at this moment, at least until those skilled workers come in?
Well, that's a complicated question. The economy is stagnating, which means it's experiencing little to no growth. It was expected that 2024 would be a hard year with contractions in the economy, but only recently the International Monetary Fund cut their expectations of potential growth of Germany in 2025 down from the rather positive prediction of 1.3% to just 0.8% growth for next year. This is quite worrying here for Europe's biggest economy. The manufacturing sector is weak, and this is weighing down on growth. Even demand for German industrial goods, which have relatively had a really great time the last few years, have weakened. This is what the latest data shows. This is also the first time in 2 decades that Germany is facing recession periods for 2 years. And this has put small and mid-sized businesses at a huge risk. They think they're in a permanent crisis. So 2023 and 24 have been hard, but research and economic institutes here predict a recovery within the next 2 years.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Let's move on. Mozambique's ruling party, Frelimo, has won the country's divisive election, extending its 49-year grip on power in the southern African nation. Daniel Chapo, a relatively unknown presidential candidate, will replace Filipe Nyusi, who has served 2 terms. After the results of the disputed polls were announced, the president-elect struck a conciliatory tone, saying he wants to be the president for all Mozambicans, calling for dialogue. At 47, Mr. Daniel Chapo, who gained 71% of the vote, will be the first president born after the independence in 1975. His closest challenger, Venancio Mondlane, got only 20% of the vote. The UN Special Envoy for the Central African Republic says the country is witnessing a positive momentum from the recent dissolution of active armed groups. Addressing the UN Security Council in New York on the situation in the country, Valentin Rugwabiza also warned against a risk of backsliding, and to avoid this scenario, she notably called for the Council to provide more resources.
Positive momentum and opportunities stemming from the dialogue between the government and active armed groups, as well as the continuous progress made in the implementation of the political agreement, notably the organization of local elections, the strengthening of border management, and extension of state presence and authority. We've increased the local ownership in support of peace and social cohesion. I'm happy to report that the dissolution of the 6 armed groups and 3 factions of armed group signatories to the APPA-RCA remained effective and resulted in the disarmament and demobilization of their combatants.
Canada has announced a sharp cut in the number of immigrants it allows into the country in an effort to pause population growth. As part of policy shift, Canada says it will reduce the number of permanent residents in 2025 from a previous target of 500,000 to 395,000. That's a 21% drop. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said his government didn't get the balance quite right when it bolstered immigration post-pandemic to address labor shortages. And NASA's SpaceX Crew 8 astronauts has safely returned to Earth after 233 days in space. It marks the completion of a groundbreaking research on the Dragon spacecraft from the International Space Station. The spacecraft carrying NASA astronauts Matt Dominic, Mike Barrett, Jeanette Epps, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Grembekin splashed down off the Florida coast at approximately 3:29 a.m. During their time on the ISS, the astronauts conducted over 200 experiments in various fields, including human health, materials science, and agriculture. That's our show today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Joker Rogers.